This is The Big Breakdown, a long look back at some of the biggest stories we're covering for you at the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today. This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Here now, Tony Brueski.
There's a certain kind of silence that comes with suburbia, the kind where nothing seems out of place. Lawns are trimmed, the porch lights flicker on right at dusk, and the people behind those windows live lives that look perfectly ordinary until you find out one of them might have been living a double life. One half PTA meetings and grocery lists, the other half bodies buried off Ocean Parkway. That's a paradox of Rex Heuermann and the allegations against him. The man accused of being the Gilgo Beach killer didn't look like a monster. He looked like the guy designing your kitchen remodel. The one who waved to the neighbors and shoveled his sidewalk. That's what makes him so terrifying, because the evil, if you believe the evidence, wasn't hiding in the shadows. It was hiding in plain sight. So today, let's walk into the mind of someone like Heuermann. Let's try to understand what kind of psychology it takes to build a life that splits so cleanly down the middle. It's not an excuse for the behavior. Again, it's trying to understand the mind. Because that's how you get places. Trying to understand. Husband, father, architect on one side, alleged sadist and murderer on the other. And the truth is, people like this rarely think of themselves as evil. They think of themselves as in control. When investigators went through Heuermann's home, they didn't find chaos. They found control disguised as clutter. Rooms piled high with papers, boxes, weapons, blueprints, 200 guns hidden behind walls, secret rooms, soundproofing. And underneath that ordinary house, the vault is private command center, which no one went into. And everybody just seemed to be like, well, that's Rex's spot. We don't go in there, and it's totally normal that we don't go in there. It's totally normal to have a person in your house say, don't ever go into this space in this house. No, it's not. And if anyone is telling you that in your house, that's a red flag. It's one thing to have your spaces and things like that. It's another to be that adamant on don't go there. There should be no place in your house that you are not allowed into. You should be able to go anywhere. At least take a peek. That basement is a perfect metaphor for his mind. Tightly sealed, compartmentalized, and loaded. Above ground, he's a family man, the provider, the successful architect. Below ground, allegedly, in every sense, is where he stashes the parts of himself he doesn't want the world to see. To live that way, you have to perfect a kind of mental origami, folding the most grotesque parts of your psyche so tightly you can still make small talk in the break room afterward. Psychologists call it compartmentalization, but in practice, it's more like self-surgery. You take the part of you that commits horror and you wall it off from the part that eats dinner with your kids. It's the only way your fantasy and facade can coexist. And if you can convince yourself those worlds don't overlap, that you can keep living both, and people like Heuermann, they thrive on that illusion. Because the moment those compartments collapse, when the mask slips, everything falls apart. That's why so many serial offenders spend years refining their performances of normalcy. They study it, they rehearse it, they build their alibis long before they ever need them. You could say Heuermann built a career out of architecture, but he built a life out of illusion. When you look at the alleged Gilgo Beach murders, you're looking at an organized mind. This wasn't random violence. These were acts of ritual control. The victims weren't chosen by chance. They were chosen because they were vulnerable, easy to access, and less likely to trigger an immediate police response. It's not coincidence. That is calculation. He chose a hunting ground where law enforcement jurisdiction was murky. Marshland, beaches, borders, and counties. He used burlap to wrap bodies, a material that hides, absorbs, and decomposes slowly. He didn't dump one body in panic. He dumped several over time, in patterns, allegedly. And And that's what's so unnerving. It's not chaos. It's choreography. And in that choreography, you can see the psychology of domination. The victims weren't just killed. They were controlled, bound, positioned, silenced. It's not about rage. It's about power. It's about the godlike feeling of deciding who lives and who dies and getting away with it. People like Heuermann feed off that rush of control. It's not just about the act itself. It's about the planning, the anticipation, and the fantasy. He may have spent days or even weeks imagining it before he ever actually acted, because fantasy is the incubator of behavior. Start small. Maybe an image, maybe a story that plays in your head when no one's looking, and over time, fantasy becomes rehearsal. The brain gets addicted to it. It needs a real outlet. And that's where sadism comes in. Not necessarily the cartoonish kind we see in movies, but the psychological sadism of domination. Reports suggest he may have made taunting phone calls to the victims' families. That's not impulsive cruelty, that's deliberate psychological theater, the joy of knowing you're the cause of someone else's anguish. It's not about killing anymore. It's about control without consequence. And yet, while he was allegedly carrying out these acts, his family's life rolled on like nothing happened. Vacations, school events, work projects. He'd allegedly wait until his wife and kids were out of town before acting. I mean, think about what that means. The discipline it takes to schedule your murders around family travel plans. And then making it normal that you don't travel with your family. Yeah, you guys go off. I'll be here. I'm working late. That's not insanity. That's a chilling form of sanity misused. It's what psychologists call high-functioning psychopathy. The mask of normalcy isn't fake. It's a tool. They can feel charm, humor, intellect. They can mimic empathy perfectly, but only as a means to an end. Underneath that, there's no real emotional core. Just mimicry and control. People like this don't feel what you feel. They observe it, study it, and use it as camouflage. That's how he could work on architectural plans by day and study criminal profiling by night. It's reported he read books on serial killers, even studied the methods used to catch them. He was designing his crimes like he designed his buildings. Structurally sound, visually unremarkable, and meant to last. You can almost imagine the thrill he must have felt every time another news story aired and didn't mention his name. Every year that passed reinforced the illusion that he was untouchable. And once you believe you're untouchable and start testing the limits, that's the psychology of escalation. The longer you get away with something, the more you need to feel that high again to prove to yourself you're still smarter than everyone else. So the crimes become riskier, the fantasies darker, and the arrogance sharper. In the end, people like this always build their own trap because the control they worship eventually turns on them. It demands attention, demands repetition, until the smallest slip, a strand of hair, a pizza crust, a digital trace, brings the whole architecture crashing down. When investigators finally arrested Heuermann, what they found was less of a house and more of a psychological time capsule. The clutter, the guns, the hidden rooms. It's like the psychological or the physical manifestation of everything he'd been keeping inside his mind for years. A mind built on secrecy will always externalize itself somehow. You can tell a lot about a person by the space they create. He designed structures for a living, but his own house was a mausoleum of hidden intent. The perfect stage for a man who lived divided between function and decay. And he convinced his family that this is normal and okay to live like this. That duality, order above chaos below, runs through everything about him. Even his demeanor after arrest. No remorse, no visible panic, just the same cold detachment. Because in his mind, being caught doesn't necessarily mean losing control. It just means the game changes. Now the control is withholding, not giving the confession, not giving closure, remaining the dark enigma everyone keeps talking about. For people like this, attention is oxygen. So what makes a person like Rex Heuermann? There's no single origin story, but most experts point to a cocktail of traits that mix nature and nurture in all the wrong ways. Maybe there's early trauma, emotional neglect, sexual shame, humiliation, exposure to violence. Maybe there's neurological wiring that dulls empathy and amplifies fantasy. Maybe there's a slow drip of resentment that builds over decades. But eventually fantasy meets opportunity, and opportunity meets compulsion. These individuals often don't explode overnight, they evolve. They start by imagining control, then testing it, then needing more of it. Their fantasies outgrow their inhibitions. And by the time they act, they've already rehearsed it in their head so many times that it feels inevitable. It's just how it goes. To them, it's not an act of rage. It's an act of completion. We often ask, how could someone like that for so long go on living without anyone noticing? The hard truth is, people like this are experts in being noticed just enough. They want to appear strange enough to be interesting, but normal enough to be dismissed. They hide behind their jobs, their marriages, their kids, their mortgages, because society loves structure. We trust it. A man with a family and a career doesn't fit our idea of a predator. That's a psychological sleight of hand. The camouflage of competence. And that's what makes these crimes feel just so damn personal to the public. Because deep down, we all know someone who hides behind respectability, someone who makes your skin crawl, but you can't quite explain why. That's why cases like this strike such a nerve. They expose the lie that monsters are easy to spot. They're not. Sometimes they're just architects with good posture and bad secrets. But make no mistake, the alleged crimes here are not the product of stress or mental illness in the colloquial sense. They're the product of deliberate cruelty sustained over time. What we're looking at isn't a man who snapped, it's a man who thrived. People who found a way, or someone in this case, who found a way to merge sexual gratification with domination and then build a secret life around it. The internet searches for torture, for methods of control and trophies. They all point to a sadistic personality driven by the thrill of power, not the release of rage. It's not about emotion, it's about engineering. And that's the most chilling part. He engineered his life the way he designed his buildings: precision, patience, and absolute ownership of every detail. In the end, what does it mean to understand someone like Rex Heuermann? It doesn't mean empathizing, that's for sure. It means recognizing how methodical evil can be when it wears the face of normalcy. It means seeing how the need for control left unchecked can mutate into a hunger for domination. It means remembering that psychopathy isn't always loud. Sometimes it's polite, it's functional, and professionally dressed. The scariest monsters aren't the ones who hide in the closets, in the dark. They're the ones who learn to smile in the daylight. And so we're left with this: a man whose alleged crimes read like blueprints of human depravity, lines drawn carefully across the decades, intersecting at points of cruelty and concealment. When you strip away the headlines, what's left is a study in psychological architecture, the way the human mind can build entire structures to contain its horror. Upstairs, the architect draws perfect lines. Downstairs, the killer builds walls no one can see. And for years it worked, until one day the walls cracked, the secrets seeped out, and the silence of suburbia broke, revealing the twisted design beneath. That's the alleged mind of Rex Heuermann, a blueprint of control, a monument to denial, and a warning to anyone who still believes monsters only live in stories. Give me your thoughts in the comments section. You know somebody like Rex? You have a Rex in your life? Did you at one point in time? They don't always go to these sort of extremes, but they can be just as damaging to those who have to encounter them and live with their madness. Again, tell me your thoughts in the comment section on YouTube. Just search Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski to find us there, and do that same search wherever you get podcasts so you can take us with you wherever you go. Hit subscribe right now so you don't forget, and then you get all of the stuff that we put out for you every single day. Lots of content every day for you. Check it out. Until next time, I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast. This is Hidden Killers Live with Tony Brueski, Stacey Cole, and Todd Michaels.
The evidence is going to be a big fulcrum of this entire case. And again, it's a tightrope. You're combining all these cases into one. You're using a new type of technology that hasn't been used in a New York court case before. Is that going to present some issues? How receptive are juries to hearing evidence from, a new way of examining DNA? It's already confusing as it is.
It very much is. Jurors often look at experts, at least initially, as having significant authority in that field. Just being deemed an expert by the judge and being allowed to testify at trial, there's some credibility that might be imputed because of that from the jury to the expert. That being said, certainly defense is going to find some expert in DNA sciences who says, hey, this is too new, it's not reliable, you can't, bet on it and hang your hat on it for convicting a person of murder. And they'll find an expert who will say that. I very much anticipate. So it's going to be a battle in there, and the prosecution is going to have to do a good job of explaining exactly what this is and why it should be reliable, and especially based on how new it is.
Well, and obviously every technology has its first day in court. This will be the first time, supposedly, in New York for this to be tested out. Could this trial set precedent for future cases and how advanced DNA is used in future prosecutions nationwide, especially if they do get a conviction on it, saying it worked over here, let's use it more over here?
100%. It could have a cascading effect throughout the country in that fashion, because one of the main factors that a court looks at in deciding whether to allow expert testimony is, hey, did another judge do it? Did they think it was good enough? Did they think it was sufficient? And if so, well, I feel reasonably comfortable with admitting such evidence in my case as the judge. And so, it's definitely going to have a significant effect. I think this is going to be used in jurisdictions across the country, assuming it's successful. If it's not successful, or if it is severely weakened during trial, I think law enforcement's going to have to take a second look at that.
We know that Asa Ellerup from his wife, or ex-wife now, but from what we understand in the documentary that we recently watched, they got divorced more so for financial reasons, to protect assets and things of that nature. Okay, great, that happens all the time. But you're no longer married to him. Is there spousal rights here when this comes to testifying, when this comes to being interviewed by police, when it comes to any of that? There's certainly plead the fifth type motions, but what sort of protections does Asa have going forward in this now that they are no longer married?
If she had any involvement, which I'm not saying she did at all,
no,
but if she did, one protection is the Fifth Amendment, the right against self-incrimination and the privilege to not incriminate oneself at trial. But when it comes to spousal privilege, that gets more murky, especially when the union has dissolved. So Rex Heuermann likely will not be able to raise some kind of spousal privilege argument to prevent her from testifying entirely. It usually applies to communications that are supposed to be confidential with your spouse. And the idea behind it is that we don't want to break up families by having one spouse testify against the other at trial. Well, families are already broken up. So that policy and the rationale behind the privilege doesn't really apply to this upcoming trial.
And she doesn't seem to be that she'd be opposing witness for Rex. I wonder could she be called by the defense to help back up Rex and being the good old family man that he is, according to her in the documentary?
Yes. So in this context, if there is any spousal privilege under state law, it would rest with Rex, and he could always waive that privilege and call his wife to testify, and she likely wouldn't have like her own privilege to assert. It would be the defendant who could assert it or not. So if she's going to give favorable testimony, certainly defense could call her, and they might do so in sort of an unexpected way. Perhaps they sort of posture as if, hey, you're not going to hear from the wife, whatever, and then she's the surprise witness who does who scores some points for the defense. That's happened before.
Judging by what we saw in that documentary, do you think she would be an effective witness for him?
Certainly, she could have some favorable things to say about him. That being said, on cross-examination, the prosecutor is going to talk about that residence, and they're going to talk about what was found in there, and they're going to talk about, you mean to tell me that he never told you about the, over a dozen times that he was allegedly engaged in criminal activity? You had no clue whatsoever. They could really try to impugn her credibility up there. And so it could be a big risk calling her for the defense.
Well, and she also appears a little bit like a victim. Well, a lot like a victim, and to find all this sexually deviant stuff in the house, which, if you've got some kinks, that's your deal. Fine. But we're looking at murder investigation here. And some of the things that were found, how did she not know about this?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a big question, line of questioning from the prosecutor if she testifies. Because, look, I mean, most people know their spouses reasonably well. Certainly some secrets can be hidden. But there was a lot that was taken from that house. There's a good amount of digital material as well. So it could make her look pretty bad. And also could, if she did have some knowledge and had some kind of involvement, which I'm not saying she did, but if she did, and if that comes out in trial, she could be in hot water too. So there's a lot of risks that abound with calling a spousal witness like that.
We just saw the Adelson trial, and obviously we saw one of the Adelson children who lives in upstate New York testify basically against mom, against Donna. When we saw in that documentary about Heuermann recently was the daughter, and she didn't flat out say she thinks he did it, but she seems to be kind of coming to terms with the idea that he probably did do it. And that's my conjecture on it. I think most people got that out of the documentary, that she's kind of coming there, and mom's not seeing it at all. Asa's not seeing it. What could happen here with the daughter? Could the daughter end up testifying? Could she be compelled to testify? Could she plead the fifth? I mean, could they go back and play the clips from the documentary where she's basically incriminating her father?
Yes. So the way that they would do it, she does not have any sort of daughter-parent privilege. There's no such thing exists.
Sure.
She likely doesn't have a Fifth Amendment privilege unless she had some kind of involvement, which there's no indication she did. And so what happens is they would call her, and as a witness, the prosecution would say, hey, did you ever say this about your dad? And she can either admit to it on the stand and say, yeah, I said that something that sounds incriminating. Or she could say, no, I never said that. And they'll say, hey, let's go to the tape. And we saw that in the Karen Reed case a lot in sort of a little different fashion, but
sure.
Those clips can be central to either side's case, and here more likely the prosecution.
Yeah, and I would imagine there's a treasure trove of that information. Do you think? That's just what we saw on the finished product of the documentary. As we saw in the Karen Reed case, there's a lot on the cutting room floor. Could they subpoena that sort of information from the media entity, the G Unit Productions 50 Cents Group that made the doc?
They certainly can subpoena it. Now, sometimes there are protections that arise for media outlets, but usually those protections just prevent calling the specific reporters as witnesses. Mm-hmm. There are ways to sidestep those, including subpoenaing materials, content, films, that kind of thing, to which such a privilege usually doesn't apply. So I don't think the defense is going to be shielded by any of those sort of media protections here. And the cutting room floor stuff is sometimes where the gold is at.
I bet there is. I bet it is. It's like Scrooge McDuck's gold broom, where he dives in at the beginning of DuckTales. You know what we're all talking about? DuckTales. Woo! There we go. Got a little DuckTales in. I would imagine there's a lot of it there. One more question. How the hell do you get an impartial jury on this one? I mean, where do you move this thing to? Because it's New York, it's Long Island. Everybody in this general vicinity with all of these people know about this case and know it well. It's been a trauma, I would say, to the population as a whole for many people for decades. What do you do?
Oh, totally. It's a huge quagmire for defense because so many reasons. So many people know about these allegations in New York against Rex Heuermann, tying him to multiple alleged murders. That's a huge problem. On top of that, like you said, the communities themselves have likely been impacted by these series of events, these sex workers who go missing, these bodies that are found within their communities, that they can be scared. Perhaps they have relatives who might have engaged in sex work at some point in their lives. And all of those personal connections to this case can really make it difficult for the defense to get a fair shake once we get to the trial phase. And so those will certainly be arguments if there's a conviction that'll be raised on appeal. But, do you send it to upstate New York and hope it's rural and detached enough? Even then, I'm not sure you're in a great spot.
I don't know how you get around that in this one. That's going to be very and and if you have jurors that have no clue what the hell's going on with this, do you want them as jurors?
Right.
Like to be that disconnected from. Do they have it like in an Amish community or something in upstate New York?
I was wondering if they would try. Defense would try to move it to somewhere like that. I've never seen that, but a creative idea.
Yeah. The Quakers will decide the future of Rex Heuermann. It's a fascinating case. Eric Faddis, defense attorney, as always, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your insight into these cases. Always so much appreciated. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Hidden Killers Live. Tomorrow, we're going to dive into probably more in the David case. We're going to take a look at some of the videos, some of those pieces of evidence that exist, or just pieces of media, pieces of his art, pieces of his work that look pretty damn incriminating. We'll take a look at that. Plus, we're going to also dive into newly released footage of the surviving roommates in the Brian Kohberger Idaho 4 murder case. Their testimony, what they had said to police immediately after the killings took place. We're going to dissect some of that and dig into it. And let me say this, in no way are we looking at them as any sort of guilt or suspect, or because there's people out there that do that shit. We're not doing it. We're just going to take a look at those the questions that were asked and what was the mindset. And really, I think we're going to examine the psychological end of it, the trauma that going through something like this implants into young minds that have to endure it. So that'll be tomorrow, 10 a.m. Central on our YouTube channel, Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Search it. Press subscribe if you're there right now so you don't miss any of that. And be sure to let us know what your thoughts are on this case and all the cases we've talked about in the comments section on the video. Until next time, for Eric, for Stacy, for Todd, I'm Tony Brueski. We will talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.